This video is brought to you in collaboration with wowhead.com. Hello everyone.
4 years have passed since the mortal races banded together and stood united against the might of the Burning Legion. Though Azeroth was saved, the tenuous pact between the Horde and the Alliance has all but evaporated. The drums of war thunder once again.
That introduction is where it all began, the story of classic World of Warcraft. Now with beta up and running, what better time than to sit down and talk about some of the major storylines that played out within the game. The 4 years that she's talking about, that is when we saw the events of Warcraft 3 play out. And anyone that would like to prepare themselves for classic World of Warcraft, I'd highly recommend to have played Warcraft 3 at least once. The game is a little bit old by now, but it definitely stood the test of time and it's still amazing to play through. Now in the RTS, we saw the Guardian Medivh give Warchief Thrall a vision. Bring your people to the ancient lands of Kalimdor. They're needed to help protect the world against the Burning Legion. Thrall's horde was different from the one infused with demon blood that stepped through the dark portal to conquer the world, was then defeated by the Alliance of Lordaeron at Blackrock Mountain, and those that surrendered, they were placed within internment camps. Some of the orcs managed to flee through the portal back home, some took up residence in their base within Blackrock Mountain, others had already left the horde behind. All much better fates than to stay within the internment camps. These were not exactly the best place in the world to find yourself in. There were guards pissing on you, they were mistreating the prisoners, the demon blood was still lingering in their veins. Some might say that death would have been a kind option compared to living in these camps. Thrall was still a baby when the original horde was defeated. With his parents murdered, the babe was left to die in the wilds, but that would not be his fate. A Dalish Blackmore saved him, a man who ran one of these internment camps, but he did not do so out of the kindness of his heart. He actually planned to use Thrall, to raise him as a slave gladiator, teach him to read, tactics, the way of war, and when the time was right, have him lead the other orcs in another war against the world. This one, with Adalish, leaned the charge against his own people. The son of Durotan and Draka learned the cruelty of man while growing up, but thankfully also the kindness and compassion that the humans possessed from people like Tarifa Foxton. She was his childhood friend, showed him kindness, even helped him escape at the cost of her own life. Thrall would leave the camps behind and meet up with pockets of orcs still living on the planet. Gromar's Hellscream with his Warsong clan, Drekvar and the remnants of the Frostwolf clan, the clan of his parents. Even Orkan and Doomhammer, warchief of the Horde when they were defeated but had escaped captivity from the Alliance. He was impressed and inspired by young Thrall. Together, they rose up to bring freedom to their people. While fighting, Doomhammer lost his life, and he decided to pass on his armor, his title of Warchief, and legendary Doomhammer to Thrall. That was the beginning of this brand new horde.
For the Horde!
En route to answer Medivh's call, Thrall's stolen ships, they ended up in a sudden fierce storm, and they had no choice but to seek shelter on land. On the island, they met Sen'jin, leader of the Darkspear Trolls, who saw their coming in a vision. His people at the time are dealing with humans that are quite hostile to them, establishing outposts on the island, but it would not be the humans to take Sen'jin's life. That was actually done by the Murlocs, worshipping a sea witch, a Naga, as we later find out. Sen'jin was sacrificed for her glory. His son Vol'jin would then take over leadership, and the Darkspear Trolls, they decided to come along with Thrall. They escaped from the sinking islands, and they joined the Horde. When all of this took place, Vol'jin was actually on a quest to become the Shadow Hunter that we know him as, together with his bestest buddy Selesane. He wasn't there when his father died, and while a big portion of the trolls followed Thrall on his journey, Vol'jin and some of his tribe, they weathered the Sea Witch's anger. They did so to gather all the supplies that they could, take it with them, and join their brethren around a year later in the new orc nation of Durotar. But the friendship between Vol'jin and Selesane was not meant to last. Selesane had gone mad with power and betrayed their tribe. With the use of dark voodoo, he robbed most of the Darkspear Trolls of their free will, forcing them to obey him. Vol'jin feared that all of his people would eventually fall to Selesane's sorcery, so he ordered the tribe to abandon the Echo Isles completely and move to the fishing village called Sen'jin on the coast of Durotar. Heroes are going to be sent out to strike at Selesane and his forces to win back the trolls' first home on Kalimdor.
Stay away from the voodoo.
Now, not all the trolls that you're going to encounter during Classic will be this friendly. The Sand Fury trolls in Zul'gurub, they hold powerful treasures, and legends tell of a mighty creature that they worship, a teacher called Gazrilla. More powerful and more deadly, that would be the Loa Hakar the Soul Flayer. This is an ancient terrible being that the trolls are trying to summon within zul'gurub. This is not the first time that they tried this either. But back then, the green dragoness Ysera, she put a stop to their plans, sinking their temple of Ahn'qiraj. This time, it's going to be up to heroes of the world to stop the rise of the Blood God, to stop this threat before it can spread any further. We're even going to see some friendly Zandalari trolls that are going to show up to help out. Now back to Warcraft 3. After finally arriving in Kalimdor, Thrall had to spend some time tracking down the rest of his forces as the storm had separated them. While doing so, he ran into Cairn Bloodhoof, leader of the Bloodhoof Tauren, in the middle of their own war against their ancient enemy, the Centaur. These creatures are born from the union between Princess Feridras and Zethar, the son of Cenarius. You actually run into this beautiful being as you venture into Moradin. Now Thrall, he would not ignore the injustice that he was witnessing. His horde stood as a beacon of hope for races, just like the Tauren. The misunderstood, the oppressed and the forgotten, and his horde would fight to protect those in need. Together, they bring the pain to the Centaur. The defeat, it shocks the creatures and sends them limping out of the barrens in disgrace. Never again would they see the Tauren as easy prey, and the Tauren saw the promise of a new future. At last, they had broken the cycle of conflict. The Tauren's nomadic existence was over. While Cairn helped Thrall with reaching Medivh, some of his people, they ventured west into a grassy plain known as Mulgore. There it was, where they would finally settle and build a permanent home of Thunder Bluff. Thrall and Cairn's adventures together would forge a near unbreakable bond, and so the Tauren also decided to join the Horde. That leaves only one more race that's going to join the Horde to be explained, the Forsaken. But to do that, we'll have to backtrack a little bit and explain how the Burning Legion was planned to come into the world. Like I mentioned before, the Alliance of Lordaeron had defeated the first Horde invasion. This was an alliance of the major human kingdoms, the High Elves of Quel'Thalas, dwarves and gnomes banded together for the sake of Azeroth. The Horde would then come back for a second invasion, to which some of the greatest heroes stepped through the Dark Portal to take the battle to the Horde. These heroes were forced to close the portal on the other side, would not be seen until the next expansion, meaning that the Alliance had lost quite a bit of firepower. Not to mention that at times of peace, it had started to fracture the Alliance quite a bit from within. On top of that, the Legion also sent over one of its most powerful creations, the Lich King, to get their invasion started. With the aid of Kel'Thuzad and the Cult of the Damned, they worked and planned to spread a plague across the lands of Lordaeron that did not just murder its population, it also brought them back as undead. Within Scoloman's School of Necromancy, they expanded their power and influence, made ready to cleanse the world. These actions did not go unnoticed, of course. The king, he sent out his own son Arthas to investigate, accompanied by Miss Jaina Proudmoore of the Kirin Tor. They eventually found out what was going on. At Strathholm, Arthas made an impossible decision. He was going to purge it, stop the undead before they could spread any further. A decision that would have everlasting effects on the city. A decision that Jaina couldn't believe. This was a road that she couldn't follow her beloved prince on. She left him, which placed them on completely different roads in life. Arthas would eventually make his way to Northrend, pick up Frostmourne and become an agent of the Lich King, while Jaina, she would be guided by Medivh, take the survivors of Lordaeron to Kalimdor to eventually stand with Thrall against the Legion. She did just that, while Arthas and the Scourge left a path of death and destruction in their wake, en route to Quel'Thalas. The elves did their very best to protect their lands. Many brave souls laid down their lives and were brought back to aid the army of undeath. Their ranger general, Sylvanas Windrunner, did everything she could to hold the line, to slow down this inevitable march, but ultimately, she too fell to Arthas and Frostmourne. The peaceful bliss of death was denied to her. She had been such a pain to fight that Arthas decided to bring her back as a banshee, now forced to obey his every command. Obey him as the high home of the High Elves fell, and their Sunwell was used to resurrect Kel'Thuzad as a Lich. He in turn summoned Archimonde into the world, who set his eyes on the World Tree Nordersil and his ancient enemy, the Night Elves. They had fought back a Legion invasion before, over 10,000 years ago, something that Archimonde still clearly remembered. But for Arthas, he eventually lost a huge chunk of his power, given to him by the Lich King. Enough so for Sylvanas and others amongst his undead creations to regain control, rise up against the former master. These Forsaken, they rallied to Sylvanas' side. She did her best to claim revenge, but Kel'Thuzad, he remained ever loyal to Arthas and saved the prince's life, so that he could travel back to Northrend and eventually merge with the Lich King. His kingdom was left in the hands of his faithful Lich, but Sylvanas had other plans in mind. She wanted her revenge against Arthas, and first up was the dominance of the land left destroyed by the prince. But that was not that easy to do. The Dreadlords, demons of the Legion, they were meant to keep an eye on these undead operations. They were still hanging out in the land, and they were not just going to hand it over. Varimafras was the first to fall, begging for his life. Sylvanas was willing to give him a chance to fight at her side and prove his worth. With his aid, she focused on Blackrock, who had mind-controlled the local humans under the command of Gerevos. Their minds were liberated, Blackrock fell, and Gerevos' forces were added to hers. She promised him to give them the lands back if he helped her out, a promise that she never intended to fulfill. Balnazar, the last Dreadlord, was slain by Varimafras himself as a final test of his loyalty, while, with their mission complete, Gerevos became a snack for her ghouls. Not a man that would be quickly missed. Now taking the lands and holding them, they are two different things. The Scarlet Crusade with their monastery, that's an organization hell-bent on eradicating the undead. They've also been infiltrated by Dreadlords and became so zealous in their quest that they could no longer see the difference between the living and the undead. There's also Kel'Thuzad to consider. Humans and other forces that are not too friendly towards what they see as the Scourge. They are in desperate need of the allies, and it's the Horde that lets them in. Now back over at Thrall. He eventually finds Medivh, who tells the war chief as well as Jaina that they need to work together for the sake of the world. Quite a bizarre idea at the time, the Alliance and Horde working together considering the past between the two, but they are very wise leaders and decide to put the past behind them. This leads to some amazing events, like Gromar's Hellscream sacrificing himself to slay Manoroth, liberating his people from the demonic curse. Their group also makes contact with Malfurion Stormrage and Tauren the Whisperwind. They're the leaders of the Night Elves and well aware of Archimonde being back on the planet. They team up with the plan of blowing up the World Tree Nordrassil and Archimonde with it. This would mean that the Night Elves are going to lose their immortality, but that's a small price to pay if it means the salvation of the world. Malfurion gathers the ancient spirits of the forest, while their forces hold off Archimonde for as long as they can. By working together, they're able to do the unthinkable. They actually defeat Archimonde. Medivh's plans have worked out just as he had hoped. His time on the world was over, but Jaina and Thrall, they decided to do their best to keep this peace going. She took the remaining survivors of Lordaeron, and they settled within Faramir. While Thrall, he also decided to stay in Kalimdor, in a land called Durotar, named after his father. Their capital of Orgrimmar, named after Orgrim Doomhammer. That would be the Horde's bastion of power in the region. Now this had Thrall and Jaina trying to make the Alliance and Horde see that amazing things are possible when they're working together. Not everyone is able to let go of the past like that though. Forces from both within and without, they keep those drums of war going.
The drums of war, thunder, once again.
So what might the Alliance look like? Well, considering the events that took place in Lordaeron, the High Elves and the humans from that area, they're off the table. Instead, we see their sister kingdom, Stormwind, adding their humans to the ranks. Quite a lot of people were surprised to hear that it's King Anduin ruling them, believing that people are mixing it up with the current lore, but even back then, it's young Anduin Wrynn that was the King of Stormwind. The story behind that has to do with Deathwing and his child Onyxia. Disguised as Lady Katrana Prestor, she has her black dragon claws deep into the House of Nobles. She was able to convince them not to pay the stonemasons what was promised after the work of rebuilding Stormwind, which led to riots in the streets, the death of Varian's wife Tiffin, and the rise of the Defiance Brotherhood. Led by Edwin Van Cleef, they took up residence within the Dead Mines, planning their revenge. But they were also recruited by Katrana to kidnap Varian. Her goal was to gain control over the human kingdom, and she planned to split Varian into two. One was going to be the weak-willed Varian, which she could easily keep on the throne, easily manipulated. And then the strong-willed Varian, his stronger side, that would simply be killed off. Sadly for her, those plans didn't exactly work out. The strong-willed Varian, he was able to escape, but all of that actually happens off-screen, and you don't really see it play out in the game. Instead, we eventually figure out who Katrana really is. We expose her for all to see, and send her running back to her lair, where heroes gathered to slay the dragon and bring her head back to Stormwind as proof of demise. Story-wise, she actually kidnapped Anduin and took him back to her lair, but was then slain by the two Varians and a group of heroes. In their confrontation, she was even kind enough to turn Varian back into one single being, but during Classic, it was actually Anduin ruling the city, with Katrana and Bolvar Fordragon at his side. The legendary paladin, appointed as Regent Lord to handle the day-to-day duties of administrating the kingdom until the child was a little bit older.
You hold a grim destiny in your hands, brother, but it is not your own. Bolvar!
Yep, it's that Bolvar. Joining them are the Night Elves, which might seem a little bit odd, considering that they did team up with the Horde against the Legion. But at the same time, the Horde also killed the demigod Cenarius, who is Malfurion's teacher in the Druidic ways, and they also chopped down a fair bit of their sacred forest for lumber. The lands of Durotar and the Barrens, they're not exactly rich with resources, which is a battle that we can see play out within Warsong Gulch. There's also the battleground Rafi Basin and Alterac Valley, both of them showing the Alliance and Horde clashing with each other.
My heart sleeps in the Emerald Dream.
After blowing up Nordrassil, the Night Elves now live on a brand new world tree called Teldrassil. This one does not have the same blessings as Nordrassil did, so the Night Elves, they still have to deal with no longer being immortal. The tree was actually planted by Vandal Stackhelm against Malfurion's wishes. The Archdruid believed that nature would never bless such a selfish act. And he was right. But even more dangerous is the part where Fandral, he's been corrupted, is being manipulated by the old gods. Ages ago, Fandral lost his son in the War of the Shifting Sands, which was a massive battle to contain the threat of the old god Kafun. Through many sacrifices, they were eventually able to set up the Scarab Wall and keep Kafun contained, but now the image of his dead son is manipulating Stackhelm. Kafun and his forces are still a massive threat to the world though. So much so that the Alliance and Horde, they're going to pool their swords together and do the impossible. Stack up on nature resistance gear, venture into Ahn'qiraj, and they're going to defeat Kafun. The old gods, these dark and powerful entities, they're locked beneath the surface of the world, desperately wanted to break out of their prisons. Teldrassil has been corrupted through the effects of the Emerald Nightmare, but this is not the only old god influence that we're going to see throughout Classic. Nearby, in Blackfathom Deeps, the Naga are protecting and making sacrifices to Akumai, which is a creature that holds a sliver of the old god's power, but is still incredibly dangerous. There will be world bosses known as the Dragons of Nightmare, green dragons taken by the dream's corruption that will occasionally wreak havoc on the mortal world. The ogres in Diremal, they also feel the nightmare's effects, and the dangers of the Wailing Caverns, they are caused by a druid stuck within the nightmare. All in all, you might want to pay close attention to the quest that you do for Stackhelm, as he does not believe that Tyrande is the right ruler.
I have vision that she lacks.
Then, the gnomes of Gnomragon, they remain loyal to the Alliance. Their brilliance has sprung some remarkable inventions and also established the Deepron Tram, fast transport between Stormwind and Ironforge. Sadly, they don't really have a capital to offer, since in the war against the Trogs, their appointed leader, Galbin Mekatork, he made some horrible decisions. He listened to Sicko Firmaplug, a gnome he'd been friends with for a very long time. Sicko had the idea of using gas to wipe out the Trogs. The gas should have stayed in the quarantined areas and the lower sections of Gnomragon, poisoning the invaders as they emerged from the depths, while the gnomes, they waited safely sealed away within the upper urban tunnels. At the time, this had seemed like the only way out of their unforeseen invasion. Firmaplug had seemed so confident that this stuff would do the trick. Sadly though, most of the Trogs had just shambled through the gas, if anything, growing wilder as they became irradiated. Even worse, the gas had risen through Gnomragon, killing the gnomes who had sat waiting in their homes, choking on vile green clouds behind doors that their High Tinker had promised to keep them safe. 80% of their population, they died that day. Even Sicko was surprised. His calculations, it had estimated around 30% of a population. That's how far he was willing to go to make Galbin look bad. Sicko escaped his punishment and now rules over Gnomragon, driven mad by the radiation. Meanwhile, the dwarves of Ironforge, they were kind enough to give the gnomes a place in the city, but the gnomes, they could see the pity in their eyes. That was the hardest part. For a race of ambitious folks whose lives were validated by a masterful command of the scientific laws of the universe, to be pitied was simply unbearable. To be pitied was to be insulted. Galbin knew, for the sake of his people, they would have to retake their former city, retake their beloved Gnomragon, and retake their gnomish pride.
Hello there! Welcome to Tinkertown. Any news from Gnomragon?
Speaking of the dwarves, they're the final option of races amongst the Alliance. Once upon a time, all the three dwarven clans, Dark Irons, Wildhammer and Bronzebeard, they lived together within Ironforge under the rule of Modemus and Volmar. Their king died and a civil war broke out, one that was won by the Bronzebeard clan, which meant that the Dark Iron and the Wildhammer, they had to go. The Wildhammers eventually settled in Grimbatal, doing pretty good for themselves and letting things be, whereas the Dark Irons, they built a city in Red Ridge Mountains, or at least that was what was known like back in the day. They couldn't let it go though. They were still fuming at their defeat, and they gathered their forces to retaliate. Both the Wildhammer and the Bronzebeard were able to repel the attacks and combine their forces to stop the Dark Irons once and for all. Emperor Fauruzan, leader of the Dark Irons, he scrambled to find a way to defeat his enemies. He decided to draw on the fiery power from deep within the world and use it as a weapon. A great spell was woven, but while conjuring, his mind turned to the death of his wife and his recent defeats. Anger roiled through his heart, affecting the spellwork. Unwittingly, he ripped Ragnaros the Firelord from his elemental plane of fire, summoning him to the surface of the world. The Fire Lord's violent rebirth sparked a series of apocalyptic explosions that instantly killed Vol'jin and shattered the surrounding mountains. The raging volcano, known as Blackrock Mountain, now towered over the ruined Dark Iron Kingdom. The land was renamed to the Burning Steppes and the Syrian Gorge. Vol'jin's subjects that managed to survive his spell were gone wrong. They were enslaved to Naxxramas. From his lair in the molten core, the Fire Lord gave his orders and had them carve out a new fortress under the mountain, which was called Shadowfort City. Within their fiery home, they would continue nursing the hatred of the Wildhammers and the Bronzebeards. Now the battle at Grimbattle, it had done so much damage that the Wildhammers, they decided to move on. They settled in the hinterlands, but the war against the Dark Irons, it had smoothed things over between them and the Bronzebeards. We would actually see the Wildhammers fight with the Alliance of Lordaeron against the Horde, but they're not available in Classic quite yet. All we get are the Bronzebeard clan, who were led by Magni Bronzebeard. They are very keen on figuring out their heritage, where they came from, how they were created. Part of their quest for knowledge that will take us into Uldaman, an ancient Titan vault. The King of Ironforge also needs the aid of heroes to go and rescue his daughter Moira. She's been captured by the Dark Irons and taken to their city. Much to the surprise of the Alliance infiltrators, Moira was actually furious at their actions, this so-called rescue mission. Over time, she had fallen in love with the leader of the Dark Irons, as, unlike her father, he actually showed her respect, kindness, did not think less of her simply because she was born as a woman. Pregnant with Vol'jin's child, she decides to not return home, instead carry on his work, put aside her anger, and lead the Dark Irons. This strike on Shadowfort City, it had left her clan in absolute chaos, and for the moment, this was an advantage, an opportunity to get them out of enslavement. While Ragnaros' forces were distracted, she quietly let out word that the Dark Iron Dwarves were being forced to create a massive army for the Fire Lords. To draw as much attention as possible, Moira made sure that the rest of the world also knew that there were riches and artifacts to be found, untold power hidden deep within the mountain. She hoped that some adventurous or greedy heroes would band together to shatter Ragnaros' defenses and banish the Fire Lord back to the elemental plane. Her plan worked better than even she could have dreamed. The Hydraxian Waterlords, elemental beings of water who were natural enemies of the fire elementals, they also got wind of this. They offered aid and rewards to anyone foolish or brave enough to challenge Ragnaros. As the molten core defenders fell, the champions decked themselves out in their fire resistance gear. They used the gifts of the Waterlords to destroy Ragnaros' protective runes, leaving no barrier between them and the Fire Lords. Ragnaros' strength was legendary, but it was not enough to slaughter the invaders. In defeat, he was banished back to his elemental plane, meaning that the Dark Irons were finally free. Their leader didn't stop there though. Ragnaros only held control over the lower half of the mountain, the upper half that belonged to Nefarian, Deathwing's son and brother to Ahn'qiraj. He'd been working very hard on accomplishing his father's goals of reinvigorating the Black Dragon flight. He was experimenting and combining the power of all 5 different flights to create a powerful new one known as the Chromatic Dragonflight. Nefarian had kept his presence shrouded, relying on unusual allies to protect his territory. Some of the orcs that survived the defeat at the hands of Lordaeron, they made base within the mountain. They were led by Dalrend Blackhand and saw themselves as the true Horde, did not acknowledge Thrall as the war chief. With the promise of the Black Dragon's aid, a lie by Nefarian, they teamed up with the Black Dragons, enemies that Moira needed to take care of. Once again, she had her people send information to the far corners of Azeroth, telling the world that Dalrend's horde had allied with the Black Dragon flight. Her spies made sure that this knowledge found its way to Orgrimmar. As she suspected, it immediately caused an uproar amongst the leadership of the Horde. Thrall had known about this true Horde for years, but he had never imagined that they posed any real threat. If Blackhand was foolish enough to trust the son of Deathwing, then there was little time to waste. Though he was a mighty warrior, the Horde's heroes he faced were mightier still. The self-proclaimed leader of the true Horde, he died in his stronghold. His followers then scattered, abandoning the Black Dragon flight. Nefarian turned his wrath on the Horde's intruders, but they did not flee. They cut their way through endless waves of Nefarian's twisted creations, until he too fell to their strength and persistence and beautiful Onyxia scale cloaks. A scale from his sister, imbued in the gear, protecting them from being engulfed by Shadow Flame, they defeated the Lord of the Blackrock Mountain. The Horde's champions took Nefarian's head as proof of their victory and returned to Orgrimmar as conquering heroes, which left Moira and the Dark Irons to wait for the perfect opportunity to return home and reclaim Ironforge. But that, of course, is future talk. Now, the last raid to talk about, that should be a familiar one. It is the floating citadel of Naxxramas. Hovering over the Plaguelands, Kel'Thuzad and the means of the Lich King, they await any hero foolish enough to challenge them. In the comics, it was actually Darian Mograine that went into Naxxramas. In-game, it's heroes of the Alliance and the Horde. Decked out in frost resistance gear, the world showed Arthas that they had grown very strong. Even Kel'Thuzad was defeated, but not completely destroyed, as the greed of heroes would see his phylactery survive, and he would return with Naxxramas during Wrath of the Lich King. I really wonder how many are going to be able to conquer Naxxramas this time around, maybe even obtain the Corrupted Ashbringer. Time will tell, but this is the major background and story that you're going to find within Classic Warcraft. Now, of course, there are going to be many more smaller stories that play out, but talking about all of them would take us all day long. Instead, I'll post a list of quests that I would recommend to check out in the description down below. By all means, let me know your recommendations in the comments as well, and I'll add them to the list. There's also going to be a playlist with videos that I've done in the past, covering events and characters of Classic in much more detail. Per usual, there's also the Wowhead article to check out for more details on all the things that we talked about today. All of that in the description down below. So for now, I think we've been going on for long enough. As always, thank you very much for watching, everyone. Subscribe if you like my videos. Leave a like if you enjoyed this one. And until next time, guys. See ya!